Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another Victober video for you, and I will be doing a review of Mistress and Maid, a household story by Dinah Mulock Craik. This book was originally serialized from January 1862 to December 1862 in Goodreads, and then put out in 2 volumes, only 2 volumes, by Hurst and Blackett in 1863. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the plot and some themes and read you some passages. This review will be spoiler free. Let's jump in. So, in Mistress and Maid, we are following 3 sisters, Joanna, Selina, and Hilary Leaf. They have been left in genteel poverty due to the men in their family being terrible with money. And we are looking at the relationship between them and their maid, Elizabeth Hand, who they hire as a young girl of, I believe, 15 at the beginning of the story. And we go through at least like 10 years with them. We are also looking at their nephew, Ascot Leaf, who is a young man just finishing up his study of medicine, and the conflicts that they run into with him because he is kind of like the rest of the men in their family, aka useless. So I picked this up for Hannah's challenge of reading a book about education. The 3 Miss Leafs run a small school at the beginning of the book, and education is one of the biggest themes, especially throughout the first half of the novel. At the beginning of the book, the youngest sister, Hilary, is fairly young, I believe 20, and she is very well educated. Craik writes, "For she was a clever girl with a genuine love of knowledge. Latin, Greek, and even the higher branches of arithmetic and mathematics were not beyond her range, and this she found much more interesting than washing dishes or sweeping floors. True, she always did whatever domestic duty she was told to do, but her bent was not in the household line. She had only lately learned to see dust, to make a pudding, to iron a shirt, and moreover to reflect as she woke up to the knowledge of how these things should be done and how necessary they were." Hilary, being the one who is less inclined to housework and more inclined to these kind of more academic pursuits, is a prevailing theme through the book. But what Craik is more interested in with education is kind of the development of the lower classes. So when they hire Elizabeth, she really has no idea what she's doing. She's a 15-year-old girl. She's never worked for anybody before. And the middle sister, Selina, is kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest. And she expects Elizabeth to be perfect immediately. And so Hilary says, "Selina is so very unjust, always expecting impossibilities. She would like to have Elizabeth at once a first-rate cook, a finished housemaid, and an attentive lady's maid, and all without being taught. She gives her things to do, neither waiting to see if they are comprehended by her, nor showing her how to do them. Of course the girl stands gaping and staring and does not do them, or does them so badly that she gets a thorough scolding." So this idea that you need to actually teach people to do the things that you're asking them to do, which seems obvious, but apparently not. So this idea nobody is just born the perfect servant. They need to be educated and taught and shown, and you need to make sure that they actually understand what you're telling them. So Hilary at one point takes on the task of teaching Elizabeth how to write. Elizabeth already knows how to read. She went to the national school when she was younger, but writing is just something she hasn't practiced with and can't really do. And so when Hilary is taking on teaching her, she says, It is just as with our school children, you know. We have to seize hold of their hearts first and their heads afterward. This idea that to educate someone, you need to have a certain amount of love for them and they need to have a certain amount of love for you. You need to get to them on this personal level in order to successfully educate them. The idea of education is also very tied up with Craik's discussion of class, which is the theme we'll talk a little bit more about, but I do have some quotes relating to both of them. Elizabeth is kind of borrowing books from the sisters. And this is like seen as kind of bad. Craik writes, though this surreptitious pursuit of literature under difficulties could not, of course, be allowed, I grieve to say that Miss Hilary took every opportunity of not only giving the young servant books to read, but of talking to her about them, and also that a large proportion of these books were, to Miss Selina's unmitigated horror, absolutely fiction. Stories, novels, even poetry, books that Hilary liked herself, books that had built up in her own passionate dream of life, wherein all women were faithful, tender, heroic, self-devoted, and all men were something not unlike Robert Lyon. Or Leon, I'm not sure. That's a family friend who Hilary is in love with. Did she do harm? Was it, as Selina and even Joanna said sometimes, dangerous thus to put before Elizabeth a standard of ideal perfection, a quixotic notion of life in its full purpose, power, and beauty, such as otherwise never could have crossed the mind of this working girl, born to parents who, though respectable and worthy, were in no respect higher than the common working class? I will not argue the point. I am not making Elizabeth a text for a sermon. I am simply writing her story. So Craik seems to be aware that there is this thought that the lower classes should not be as educated as the more middle and upper classes, but she's having her characters do it anyway. So she's kind of critiquing that idea of you shouldn't let a lower working class girl read books because it might put her mind higher than where she should be at. And we really see this through the character of Hilary, who is really the one educating Elizabeth and who also takes on her speech. So Elizabeth talks with a bit of dialect, especially at the beginning. I canna bear to see him. Cannot, suggested her mistress, who, not seeing any reason why Elizabeth should not speak the Queen's English as well as herself, had instituted H's and stopped a few more glaring provincialisms. And we repeatedly see throughout the book that this is positive and that it does Elizabeth good. Elizabeth is a very upstanding character. Craik writes, the nearer she was lifted to her mistress's level, the more her mind grew, so that she could better understand her mistress's cares, and the deeper her consciousness of the only things which gives one human being any real authority over another, personal character. She later says, slowly, out of her rough, unpliant girlhood, was forming that character of self-reliance and self-control which, in all ranks, makes of some women the helpers rather than the helped, the laborers rather than the pleasure seekers, women whose constant lot it seems to be to walk on the shadowed side of life, to endure rather than to enjoy. This education has really turned her into an upstanding person. And so Craik is showing it as something that is really necessary. We need to educate the people of the working classes. There is a lot about mutual respect between members of classes and between servants and mistresses. So at one point, Selina is suggesting that they lock up their valuables because Elizabeth might steal them. And Hilary is like, no, we're not doing that. And Selina says, how can she respect a family that never locks up anything? And Hilary responds, how can we respect a servant from whom we lock up everything? Respect a servant? What do you mean, Hilary? I mean that if I did not respect a servant, I would be very sorry to keep her one day in any house of mine. If I could not trust her with our coffee, tea, sugar, and so on, and bring her up from the very first in the habit of being trusted, I would recommend her being sent away tomorrow. So this idea that like we should, if we're gonna hire her, we should respect her enough to not think she's going to steal from us. And if we really think she's gonna steal from us, why on earth would we hire her? Which like makes complete sense. At another point, Craik writes, I know I am painting this young woman, Elizabeth, with a strangely tender conscience, a refinement of feeling, and a general moral sensitiveness, which people say is seldom or never to be found in her rank of life. And why not? Because mistresses treat servants as servants and not as women. Because in the sharp, hard line they draw at the outset between themselves and their domestics, they give no chance for any womanliness to be developed. And therefore, since human nature is weak and without help from without, a long degraded class can never rise. Sweethearts will still come crawling through back entries and down at area doors. Mistresses will still have to dismiss helpless and fallen or brazen in iniquity many a wretched girl who was once innocent, or, if nothing actually vicious results, may have many a good, respectable servant who left to be married return, complaining that her young man, whom she knew so little about, has turned out a drunken scoundrel of a husband, who drives her back to her old comfortable place to beg for herself and her starving babies a morsel of bread. So once again, we have this idea of class and education, but as also gender kind of tied together, and having respect for servants, treating them as people, and educating them so that they can become better. Also a lot about social mobility, connecting this with Marissa's challenge. So there is a character named Mr. Ascot. He is the godfather of Ascot Leaf, which is why Ascot Leaf is named Ascot after Mr. Ascot. So most small towns have their hero, and Stowberry's, where they live, was Peter Ascot, the grocer's boy, the little fellow who had gone up to London to seek his fortune and had, strange to say, found it. Whether by industry or luck, except that industry is luck, and luck is only another word for industry, he had gradually risen to be a large city merchant, a dry salter, I conclude it would be called, with a very handsome house, carriage, etc. So we have people rising in social status. We also have people falling. The Leafs were much wealthier than they were originally. They have fallen quite a bit just by the start of the book, and they fall further. But we also have this idea of moving from being genteel into trade, with Hilary at one point needing to take a job. She meets a woman named Miss Balquitter who helps a lot of young women get work. And Hilary explains her situation to her, which ended in the one cry, familiar to how many thousands more helpless young women, I want work. So Miss Balquitter's pet project was to induce educated women to quit the genteel starvation of governessships for some good trade, thereby bringing higher intelligence into a class which needed not the elevation of the work itself, which was comparatively easy and refined, but of the workers. So like this idea of elevating through education. We're going to bring in this educated, genteel class of women who can't do anything right now, like aside from work as a governess and make basically no money. Bring them into a trade where they can make good money and where they can kind of raise up this class of people in these positions. And when Hilary decides to take this job, she says, I can certainly do the work, and it cannot make me less of a lady. Besides, we had better not be ladies if we cannot be honest ones. They need money. Here's an opportunity to get money. It's not going to make her less of a lady because she is working to get her money, she feels. And so this leads into the theme of gender, which is another very important one for this book. Miss Ballquitter says at one point, "I have no desire to see young women made into men." And Miss Ballquitter seemed a little scandalized. "But I do wish girls were taught fewer accomplishments and more reading, writing, and arithmetic, were made as accurate, orderly, and able to help themselves as boys are." So this idea of needing equal education for men and women. And Craik is all for women being able to be independent. She writes, "Men will not believe what is nevertheless the truth, that we can stand alone better than they can, that we can do without them far easier and with less deterioration of character than they can do without us, that we are better able to provide for ourselves interests, duties, and pleasures. In short, strange as it may appear, that we have more real self-sustaining independence than they." This is not to say, though, that she does not support the typical gender roles of the Victorian period. She continues on, "Of course, that the true life, the highest life, is that of man and woman united. No one will be insane enough to deny. I am speaking of the substitute for it, which poor humanity has so often to fall back upon and make the best of." And we see her conforming to these gendered roles in Hilary's feelings for Mr. Leon. Hilary says, "And I cannot help him, I cannot help him," was her bitter cry until, passing from the dreamland of fancy, the womanly nature asserted itself. She thought if it had been, or if it were to be, her blessed lot to be chosen by Robert Leon, how she would take care of him, what an utter slave she would be to him, how no penury would frighten her, no household care oppress or humble her, if done for him and for his comfort. To her brave heart, no battle of life seemed too long or too sore, if only it were fought for him and at his side." So she is conforming to the gender roles of the day. I would not say that Dinah Mulock Craik is like this huge feminist, but she is arguing that women need better education, that women do need to be able to work and have independence because, let's face it, sometimes things do not work out for a woman and a man to just get married and live happily ever after. The last theme that I want to talk about is that of kind of what I call like the everyday. So Craik is very much writing about like what she calls at one point like mundane, like just typical life. Writes, "I misdoubt many will say I am writing about small, ridiculously small things. Yet is not the whole of life made up of infinitesimally, I'll put it right here, okay, small things, and in its strange and solemn mosaic, the full pattern of which we never see clearly till looking back on it from far away, dare we say of anything which the hand of eternal wisdom has put together, that it is too common or too small." She says, "Look tenderly, reader, on this picture of struggle so small, of suffering so uninteresting and mean. I paint it not because it is original, but because it is so awfully true." At another point, possibly grand or clever or happy people who condescend to read this story may despise it, think it unideal, uninteresting, treating of small things and common people, poor persons, in short. I cannot help it. I write for the poor, not to excite the compassion of the rich toward them, but to show them their own dignity and the bright side of their poverty. Finally, at another point, "But I am aware all this will be thought very uninteresting, except by women and mothers." So very much talking to this idea of the divide between high culture literature and popular fiction. And this idea of, yes, I'm writing for the poor. I'm writing for the popular audience. And maybe what I am writing about seems small to you, but that is life. That is what life is. So I really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I thought that it was just fantastic. I loved the relationship, particularly between Hilary and Elizabeth, but really between all 3 of the sisters and Elizabeth. And I just thought it was so good. I think it's great for fans of Charlotte Mary Young or Margaret Oliphant, and I highly recommend picking it up. So that is my review of Mistress and Maid. Let me know down in the comments. Have you read it? Are you thinking of picking it up?